Hey, welcome back, everyone. Good morning. Happy Monday. Some big news today. I'm going to be going over what's been happening with the Nord Stream pipelines because I think everybody's wondering, were they destroyed by Russia? Were they destroyed by the United States? Was NATO involved? I want to go over the actual evidence. So I want to show you all, we're going to go over SOSIS and what SOSIS is, which is an undersea tracking system. We're going to go over some air traffic data showing a very interesting picture of a certain military plane that just so happened to fly over that pipeline right at the time when it was bombed, or right at the time it was destroyed, right? We'll have to see what happened with it. Some very strange incidents, such as Ukrainian, what they call kamikaze undersea drones, one of them washing up on shore right next to a Russian military base, and a lot of other weird stuff that I think hasn't been widely talked about. Taking all this together, I hope that we can paint at least some circumstantial evidence to give some real evidence on what may have taken place with the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline. For those of you not familiar with it, basically, there's only a few Basically, a lot of Europe gets its energy from Russia. This was understood when Russia was, during the Obama administration, when Russia was trying to, according to U.S. intelligence at that time, use the control of energy as a way to control other countries. That was one of the reasons why, when Hillary Clinton was involved with selling off America's energy independence with the Uranium One deal, that was why it was so controversial. Now, Russia has, in fact, gained a large portion of control of the global energy market, and especially over Europe, to the point where they can use it essentially as a pressure point to mess with politics throughout Europe. Now, Europe right now is facing an energy crisis. They need that energy. They need that natural gas. They need oil. They don't have enough. And so the destruction of these pipelines is very significant because of that. And also, this is a big blow as well to Russian influence as, again, the Ukraine war looks like it's expanding. And at the same time, gives Russia some additional ammunition in terms of propaganda as a rallying call for its own troops. This is actually a very important piece, not widely discussed enough, in my opinion. They're talking about limited nuclear war now. And they recently started conscripting people. They have a travel ban from Russia to other countries of men of certain age groups. And one of the problems they have is morale. They need a rallying call. This has now provided that rallying call. All right, folks, let's go over some details because, again, I don't want to draw hard conclusions. I will tell you right now, the circumstantial evidence looks a whole lot like the U.S. was involved with this. But I'm not going to draw any hard conclusions on that beyond just showing what the evidence suggests. That said, folks, let's jump into the first part of this. Oh, real quick. Okay, the border documentary is now out. That came out last week on Thursday. I know a lot of you may have missed it because I didn't. I thought it was coming out this week. It was my bad because I got the dates mixed up. The border documentary, the one where I'm at the U.S.-Mexico border, I'm on the U.S. side and the Mexico side, that is now out. That's on the Crossroads channel. You can watch it on Epic TV. This is where I look into and uncover how the United Nations is running the border crisis and how the United States, through the State Department, is financing it. I think this is a pretty impactful. It's a special feature. It's not a full documentary. Maybe a mini doc, you could call it. That is now out. Please watch it. Please share it. Help us get the word out. And again, I'll show you a trailer in a bit. But let's go into the first story. I want to start by kind of the big picture. Really just kind of what the media is talking about. Because right now, the legacy news outlets are mostly claiming, well, at least on the Democrat side, they're mostly claiming that Russia did it. And you see this across... Now, even some of the conservative media, I think maybe with the exception of Fox and the exception of a few, independent media, most of them are blaming it on Russia. Fox has suggested that the U.S. may have been involved, and so there is speculation on that side. But let me just kind of give you a big picture first. This is Forbes, and Forbes is saying this. NATO says sabotage behind destruction of natural gas pipelines. It says NATO's Secretary General said the leaks of the Nord Stream pipeline for sending natural gas from Russia to Europe were the result of sabotage. There you have the bubbling up of, where the pipelines were destroyed. It says discussed the sabotage on the Nord Stream pipelines with Defense Minister Morten Budskev, said Jens Stoltenberg on Twitter. He said, we address the protection of critical infrastructure in NATO countries. Critical infrastructure being any kind of infrastructure that is necessary for a country to function. That could be energy infrastructure, that could be roads, that could be water supplies, and so on. So they're looking to protect now, in the wake of this, critical infrastructure in NATO allied countries. And it says Nord Stream 1 and 2, because both were destroyed. Both of these pipelines were destroyed. They lie on the bed of the Baltic Sea and bring gas from Russia to Germany. Nord Stream 2 was finished last year, but Germany never opened it because Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th. That was kind of a lifeline that Germany had. If things get really bad this winter, that lifeline is now lost. It says, according to German security officials, Nord Stream 1 may be permanently damaged by salt water that could corrode the inside of the pipes, because they were destroyed and water's now leaking in. It says some speculated that Russia was behind the attack on its own pipelines. The attack was, quote, probably premeditated and planned for several weeks before it occurred. An anonymous British military official told the Times of London, this is not some casual terrorist attack, it has to be a government. That's according to Michael Clark, a British military expert. And it says privately, everyone is convinced this is a Kremlin-inspired piece of sabotage. And it says spokespersons for the governments of Ukraine and Poland agreed that Russia was behind the attacks. In other words, NATO, the UK, Poland, Ukraine, they're blaming Russia. And a lot of the U.S. media is blaming Russia. Now, on the other side, this is what's happening. TRT World Now on Twitter said this. They have a video of of Putin, Vladimir Putin speaking. I won't play because he's speaking Russian. But they're saying this, that basically Ukrainian grain goes to Europe. He's saying Anglo-Saxons blew up the Nord Stream pipelines, suggesting, again, it's the ancient enemies of Russia, the Anglo-Saxons, who are behind the destruction of this. He's blaming, in other words, NATO countries. Putin is pointing the finger the other way, and he's saying, I did not blow it up, you guys blew it up. And he says the West wants to see Russia as its colony to plunder its national resources and exploit Russians as a crowd of soulless slaves. That's according to Putin. Putin is really using this as a rallying call right now. And again, you really see the divide. You see the makings of the Ukraine-Russia war expanding now into a European war, with the United States as a proxy actor in that. And this is really something that looks like it is expanding, and Russia does now have some additional fuel for its rallying call to raise troop morale, which allegedly, according to a lot of reports, was really where they were falling short. Now, I want to show you all some actual evidence now. I'll show you what we have on the evidence that Russia did it. I'll show you what evidence we have that the U.S. and NATO allies did it. I'll tell you right now that pretty much there's not much evidence that the U.S. There's not much evidence that Russia did it. Most of the evidence does suggest the United States and NATO were behind this. That being said, it's circumstantial evidence. I'm showing you circumstantial evidence that we don't have videos of a rocket going and blowing up the pipelines. But the circumstantial evidence looks pretty bad, at least for the U.S. It was not well done. Let's put it that way. This is not to say, again, that the U.S. did it. It's possible maybe they were having surveillance activities, watching for an incident like this. But the evidence looks really bad against the U.S. in terms of, again, the very likelihood that the U.S. was involved. That being said, I'll talk about the strategic element of this as well, because Russia may have done it as well. And frankly, they would have had the motivation for them to do this. It would basically be that they weren't going to be able to use the pipeline anyway. Poland was opening up, Poland, in fact, the same day opened up its own pipeline. Nord Stream 2 was already not active, right? It was more like a backup for Germany. And Russia was already shutting off Nord Stream 1. Remember, they were turning the valves, so to speak, as a pressure point. the motive, I've gone through this in my head a few times, and the only motivation I can think of why Russia would do this, and I know Kash Patel has said the same thing, is that basically it gives them a justification for upping the ante. It gives them the ability to have a rallying call. And again, it blew up an asset they weren't going to be able to use anyways. And so in some ways they would have an interest in this. Again, I will repeat, though, that there's no real evidence that Russia did it so far. But there is a lot of evidence on the U.S. side that the U.S. may have done it. Now, before we go further into this, folks, we do have a sponsor today. Today's episode is brought to you by Secure. Over 155 million Americans are affected by data leaks in 2020. The average American had their personal data stolen about 4 times over the year. People get anxious because they can't protect their online data and activity. But now there's a new email and messenger app called Secure. That's Secur. That can give privacy and security for sending emails and messages. Secure's server and data center are hosted in Switzerland, which has the strictest data privacy laws in the world. Secure does not rely on big tech companies like Amazon, Google, or Microsoft, which also means it's not subject to the Intrusive Cloud Act. Secure does not ask for your phone number, mine your data, or upload your contacts. It functions by adding people you know, then adding their secure numbers, and you can also send people an invite if they don't have it. Secure protects you from hackers getting onto your phone. You have privacy while you're on the app. Now, it's $5 for the messenger, $7 for the email, and only $10 for the email and messenger package. You can visit secure.com today for a free 7-day trial, or use the promo code Joshua to get 25% off. And big thanks out to Secure for sponsoring today's episode. Now, further on this, I want to show you first of all the evidence that Russia did it, because this is what they're saying, right? So first of all, this is the Telegraph, UK newspaper, and it says Nord Stream sabotage mapped. By saying this, they're suggesting that they mapped it, that they have a map showing it, right? They say how Putin could have carried out the attack. They're suggesting that, again, very directly, they're claiming that Russia may have done this, and they've mapped it, and this is what they have. Now, they say this. They say, with a depth of only around 70 meters, covert entry into the Baltic Sea by nuclear submarine is very difficult, if not impossible. I would argue it's actually impossible because the United States has these let me show this picture. Watch, scroll down. Look, this is the photo they use. It's Putin on a semi-submersible, like Putin went down there personally and like used the little claw arms to tear a hole in the pipeline. That's the photo. That photo was from 2013, I believe. Actually, I looked into it. Has nothing to do with this pipeline, but they're suggesting that Putin navigated a submarine and tore a hole in it, essentially. But they're blaming Russian nuclear submarines. As we go into this, I want to say that basically they're admitting that that covert entry into the Baltic Sea by nuclear submarines is very difficult, if not impossible. And I would say it is impossible to do it in a covert way. First of all, that Russian submarines are extremely loud. They're not quiet submarines. It's one of their main faults. The United States also has a tracking system, a surveillance system, specifically for tracking submarines. It was built during the Cold War. It's called SOSUS. I'll go into this later. So in other words, if Putin did this, they would have the data on it. They have not shown us the data or suggested in any way that they even have such data. But regardless, let's go further. It says divers can operate at such depths, although the currents may be tricky, and any support vessel, be it a submarine or surface vessel, would likely have to be spotted. Would likely have been spotted, given the density of traffic in the sea area. In other words, were it divers, you would have had maybe airplanes or ships there. There was no sign of Russian airplanes or ships in the area. There were on the other side, though, which I'll get into a bit. It says the water column, the mix of fresh and salt water, would also make it difficult for a submarine to maintain the right buoyancy for such a mission, suggesting that submarines would also have trouble with this. And they say messing around with divers and explosives in such conditions would be an extremely risky venture. Russian submarines are very. This is the evidence now they're giving. After they lay out that you'd be able to track it, that you need surface vessels if it was divers down there, and they're suggesting that a submarine could do it, but a submarine would be tracked and would also have buoyancy issues because it's salt and seawater. They're saying Russian submarines are very well practiced at this sort of thing, though, having honed their skills over decades investigating the undersea internet cables running across the North Atlantic. In other words, basically, they're basing this off the entire argument that Russia did this. They're basing this solely on the idea that Russia would have the capability to do it. Not that there's any evidence showing that Russia had any involvement in the area, that Russian submarines were active in the area, that Russian surface vessels were there, suggesting divers may have been there. There's no evidence of any of this. And again, I'm not going to draw hard conclusions with this. I'm just showing you what the evidence is. There's no evidence that Russia did it currently. Maybe they have it and they just haven't shown us, but currently there's nothing. The only justification they're saying is that Russia is hostile against, Europe, and that Russia would have the capabilities for this hypothetically, even though, again, they're admitting that you'd be able to track it and there'd be other systems in place and other signs if they were to do it. That being said, there is a lot of evidence on the other side, and I'm just being blunt, right? First of all, Hans Monkey of Epic TV on Truth Over News noted something interesting. He said the U.S. Navy's Sixth Fleet recently conducted exercises and research, just so happens in the exact spot where the pipeline blew up, and they, during this trial, even used mock explosives. So what was the U.S. Navy's Sixth Fleet doing in the exact area where the pipeline was destroyed, using mock explosives in a drill? Maybe they were planting explosives that could be detonated later, hypothetically speaking. This is on June 10th. It says, Sea Power, June 10th, Baltops 22. That's the name of the practice they did. A perfect opportunity for research and wresting new technology. Now, I should note that, again, this was a U.S. Navy operation they did back in June 10th. And this U.S. Navy operation, it was, again, just a practice mission, but it was just so happened to be active in the exact area where these explosions took place. And during that mission, they used what they called mock explosives, which some could hypothetically, I'm not saying there's any evidence of this, could have been real explosives they planted there to be detonated at a later time. That is totally possible. There's no evidence of that other than, again, circumstantial evidence. The photo caption is the important part here, because the article itself would just go into more of just about Baltops 22, which was the name of that operation. The photo caption here says, Lieutenant Chris Bianchi, assigned to Explosive Ordnance Disposal Mobile Unit, that's EODMU 8, prepares mock explosives for a pier-side training during exercise Baltops 22, June 10th. And they say further in on that report, quote, this year, experimentation was focused on UUV, that's underwater unmanned vehicles, meaning that they were using drones, underwater drones, navigation, teaming operations, and improvements in acoustic communication, all while collecting critical environmental data sets to advance and the automatic target recognition algorithms for mine detection. In other words, they were scanning the area. They were using undersea drones, and they were also, for some reason, working with they claim explosive ordnance disposal, but were doing operations using mock explosives. Just so happens in the exact area where the explosions did in fact take place later, which was just recently. Also, something very strange. There was a Ukrainian kamikaze drone boat that washed ashore near a Russian naval base just a few days before this. And it should be noted that this, even though it's strange, it's a semi-submersible. The Ukrainian, they call it kamikaze drone. It's a semi-submersible, allegedly, suggesting it could not dive. And being unable to dive, it's very unlikely that this drone would have been the one that they used for this, because it wouldn't make sense, technically. But it is very strange. It does suggest there was activity in the area involving explosive ordinances and so on. This is from September 22nd from Stern. This is translated from German. I'll show you the German article but this is translated from German. And it says, novel drone boat from Ukraine threatens Russian Black Sea fleet. It says, new shock for the Russian Navy. Ukrainian drone boat washed ashore near the naval base at Sevastopol. It was built as a kamikaze drone. That's the drone right there that washed ashore right by this Russian base. Ukrainian, they call it a kamikaze drone. They say Russia's ships must now expect to be chased by these small, remote-controlled boats. It says, with the closed deck, the boat is reminiscent of a submarine, but strictly speaking, it is not a real diving boat. The construction and control of a boat can completely submerge, would be very complex. This is a drone boat that protrudes only a little out of the water and thus only offers a small radar shadow. The Ukrainian boat apparently successfully broke through the Russian Navy security cordon and then ran aground on the shore near the Russian naval base in Sevastopol. Now, this, I should note, even though this is allegedly an explosive boat, it's basically, they call it a kamikaze drone, suggesting that it could basically work like almost like a torpedo, I guess, not more like a rocket hitting a ship, right? Semi-torpedo, can't dive that much. Remember what the previous article said, that had there been dive teams active, they would have needed some kind of surface vessel. Of course, the ability to put a large surface vessel in the area for monitoring activities would be difficult, but you could use something smaller, such as this, hypothetically. Now, I would say that these pieces of evidence are interesting, again, that they did these explosive ordnance disposal trainings at the location of this, that there was a strange Ukrainian boat that washed ashore. That being said, the most telling piece of evidence is actually air traffic control data. And this, for me, was the one that made me really wonder, dang, did the U.S. do this? Let me show you this. This is the actual flight map. This is an actual flight map. And this is probably the most telling part. What I'm going to show you, this is the flight map of a U.S. Navy P-8A Poseidon. This is an airplane that flew over the area, interestingly, the exact time that the pipeline blew up. In other words, a PA-8 Poseidon, a U.S. Navy airplane, right, on September 26, flew over the exact area almost within an hour, I believe, of the explosion. And this, to me, is probably the most telling piece of evidence. I'll show you another map. This is one map specifically of that, and it actually has the data of the plane. It says type P-8A, operator USN, which is U.S. Navy. Country, United States, date September 26. So it actually has the data there. This is another map. This is on pathfinder.net that shows, again, September 26, and it actually shows the flight path of that airplane. You can even hit play on it, in fact. I won't show you this because it'll take hours, but you can hit play on it, and you can actually watch the exact times that this was captured on the flight map. And you can see again that it flies over the pipeline within an hour of it exploding. Now, why does that matter? Well, remember previously, again, when, funny enough, Forbes is trying to say Russia did this, right? Using no evidence. When Forbes was suggesting that, one thing they said was that if there were undersea activities, if there were divers active, that you would need to have supporting vessels. That would mean either an aircraft or a boat. We've seen now evidence of an aircraft and a boat on the NATO side. Well, I guess technically Ukraine isn't NATO, but we do have evidence of both assets being present in the area. That being said as well, it's also totally possible the PA-8 Poseidon blew it up itself, that the divers were not needed. Now, I should note there were multiple points where there were explosions. I believe there were 3 total, 2 on one pipeline, 1 on the other, if I remember right. But interestingly, the PA-8 Poseidon has a very specific armament. And again, this is hypothetical, right? I'm not saying that this is exactly what happened. I'm showing you the circumstantial evidence, and by going over the available evidence, trying to piece together a picture of what did take place that day. Now, again, the flight map data, right? The flight map data shows that this airplane, the PA-8 Poseidon, the U.S. Navy ship, or airplane, flew over that area within an hour, Just so happens the PA-8 Poseidon has a very specific armament that could have done this. And this is Sea Power in August. This is a Navy military website. And it says this, Sea Power Magazine, Navy orders full production of Boeing HAAWC air-launched torpedo kits. And it just so happens these air-launched torpedo kits are one of the armaments that has been now given to the PA-8 Poseidon. It says the U.S. Navy has awarded Boeing a full-rate production contract for the high-altitude anti-submarine warfare weapon capability. That's again HAAWC, high-altitude anti-submarine warfare weapon capability. Let's scroll down, I'll show you the actual rocket. Now, it says what this does, it's a weapon that will allow the PA-8 maritime patrol aircraft, the one I just showed you. Now, quickly as well, the P-8A, as they're saying, is a maritime patrol aircraft, suggesting that the PA-8, aside from the possibility of using this armament we're discussing right now, and aside from that, could have actually worked as the surveillance craft that the divers could have needed. Now, that being said, this is again, just evidence that is not saying there's exactly that the U.S. did this, but again, it was present in this exact area. And again, the flight maps only show this in that area. This weapon that this has been given, it's an all-weather add-on glide kit that enables the MK-54 torpedo to be launched near or below the cruising altitude of the PA-8 Poseidon. The kit consists of a modular ALA that's strapped to a MK-54 torpedo, enabling it with precision navigation to glide to an area where the ALA separates and drops the torpedo. So that's P-8A, yeah. Drops the torpedo into the water. So in other words, this airplane that flew over the pipeline, this U.S. Navy airplane that flew over the pipeline within an hour of it being destroyed, could both work as a surveillance craft that could have supported troops that were down there, or it could have actually used an armament that was designed for basically this type of operation, a torpedo. Both of which do suggest that at the very least the capabilities were in place for the U.S. to have done this. There's no evidence of Russian assets. There is evidence of U.S. assets and Ukrainian assets. Now, I should note that with that P-8A Poseidon, it being armed with this torpedo, the work of that kit is not going to be completed until September 2024. So it's not completely sure. We're not completely sure whether they were using that, whether, again, they might have it deployed as part of a testing run, or if they had it there just as a, something available. It's not clear, again, but we do know that they do have this capability at the very least. Now, in terms of interest, let me discuss this briefly, and then I want to go into some really telling videos, folks. Now, we'll jump over to Epic TV after this, but for those of you on YouTube, I want to get over this, so we'll do it a little longer on YouTube today, just by a bit. I want to talk about who would actually benefit from this. Now, people wonder, would Russia actually have it in its interest to blow up one of its own pipelines? Well, again, given justification to keep the war going, improving morale. That would be their motivation. If Russia hypothetically did blow up the pipelines, the interest for Russia at the cost of destroying these very valuable pipelines would have been twofold. One, again, Nord Stream 2 was already not active. It was already not active. Nord Stream 1, they were already shutting down. They were getting sanctioned. And at the same time, the U.S., the United States, and NATO allies were already talking about destroying or disabling the pipelines. In other words, Russia had no use for them. The value of Russia to keep these was not there, essentially, at least not for the foreseeable future. And because of that, they would have it in their arsenal to do something very overt to destroy it. They would have had it in their interest. There's no evidence of the arsenal, right? They would have had it in their interest. The only thing they would have had in their interest to do would be to use this as a rallying call, to use this as justification to keep the war going, to raise troop morale, to give people a reason to fight because they do not have one. A lot of Russians, just reclaiming Russian territory is not like something that's going to get you wanting to go and risk your life for the most part. Maybe some of them, but not broadly speaking. Would again, and maybe even turn some countries, again, it could even turn Germany against the United States, which would be in their interest as well. Germany was kind of on the fence with this. There's also justification to up the ante, to increase, basically expand the Russia-Ukraine war while not looking like the bad guy. It would give them the justification to do that. Basically, on the Russian side, as far as I can see it, that would be the only interest. But I will emphasize again, there's no evidence that Russia did it. On the U.S. side, there is evidence. And is there justification for the U.S. to do this? Did they have it in their interest to do it? Well, yes. And not only did the U.S. have interest in doing this, but Biden himself suggested they would do something like this. And let me show you this video, folks. This is from February 7th. This is Twitter, ABC News. I'll play you the video where Biden talks about this. Biden says, if Russia invades, there will no longer be a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it. And a reporter says, well, how will you do that exactly? And, again, it's under Germany's control. And Biden says, I promise you we will be able to do that. Let me play this for you just so you see it. I'll pull it up.
Let me answer the first question first. If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly? Since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control.
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it. Let me answer this.
Yeah, so Biden is saying that he promises us that he would be able to do it, to bring an end to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline if Russia were to maintain the war. And so it does look like Biden admitted that the U.S. has the capabilities and the intent, and even said that they would do it. I'll show you one more video, then we'll jump over to Epic TV exclusively. This is from The Hill 9 months ago, and this is Senator Ron Johnson, a Republican, asking questions to Victoria Nuland, Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, during a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing to examine the U.S.-Russian policy. This is on YouTube. I'll pull up YouTube for you all real quick. And I'll play this, starting from 2 minutes, 53 seconds. 2 minutes, 53 seconds to the end, just so you guys get what's going on with this.
And we are looking at the full suite of options. I think in the context of the diplomacy that we are doing and the work that we're doing internally, I was gratified to have a chance to go through some of those specific measures in the classified session yesterday. But going beyond that in this open session, I think doesn't help us get from here to there. But everything is on the table, I would say, if that is helpful.
One thing that I believe certainly the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is pretty unified on, it may not be unanimous, was our support for sanctions against Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And that I think many of us were very disappointed that those sanctions were not fully implemented and the construction continued. I can't think of a more powerful way to punish Russian aggression than by rolling back what progress has been made and, if at all possible, prevent the Nord Stream 2 from ever being completed. Is that something that is being discussed with allies? Is that something that's being contemplated?
Absolutely. And as you recall from the July U.S.-German statement, that was very much in that statement that any moves Russian aggression against Ukraine would have a direct impact on the pipeline, and that is our expectation and the conversation that we're having.
So again, direct impact is one thing, but I'm literally talking about rolling back the pipeline. And loosely define that, but I mean taking action that will prevent it from ever becoming operational.
I think if President Putin moves on Ukraine, our expectation is that the pipeline will be suspended.
Well, I certainly hope that the Senate Foreign Relations Committee would take up legislation to go beyond just suspending it, but from ending it permanently. But anyway, thank you, Undersecretary Newland.
Now, I want to emphasize again, the evidence suggests the intent. The evidence suggests the statements that they would do it. The evidence, there's actual physical evidence that the U.S. may have done this. That being said, of course, the U.S. could be justified in doing it in terms of cutting off this lifeline to Europe that Russia could use to control Europe. At the same time, though, Europe is being thrown kind of to the wolves for the winter, so to speak, because they're having an energy crisis. I'm going to show you one more thing, and then we'll go to Epic TV exclusively, because after the pipeline was destroyed, the chairman of the EU, European Union, U.S. delegation of the European Parliament actually tweeted a thank you to the United States, and then this guy deleted it. Luckily, we have the archive of this. This is Radek Sikorski, an MEP. He posted this, then he deleted this. And people took this as evidence suggesting that, hey, maybe the U.S. did do it, because this chairman of the European Union U.S. delegation says, thank you, U.S. Thank you, USA. Then he deleted this again. What I'm showing you right now is an archive because I was able to save it. Now, it does not appear that he's from Poland. When I initially saw this, I thought that he was being tongue-in-cheek, that he was actually blaming the United States. No, he looks like he's legitimately thanking the United States. This is actually his second tweet of the image with bubbling the waters there. In another tweet, he actually had the same image, and he stated, as we say in Polish, a small thing, but so much joy. He's celebrating the destruction of it. And his Twitter feed also shows his stance on Russia and Ukraine with his pinned tweet. He has a pinned tweet, or had one, saying, if Putin conquers Ukraine, he'll come for us next. As the Ukrainians are fighting our fight, the least we can do is to protect the women and children. My interview this morning with Morning Joe, that's MSNBC here. Now, that being said, if Russia, on the other side, did do this, if they used submarines, there would actually be ways to prove it. They have not yet shown any evidence on that. There's a very complex network the U.S. has. They built it during the Cold War, and they expanded it a few years ago. That actually does give the U.S. the capability to track submarines, especially in that region, especially in the region around Russia. No Russian submarine goes anywhere without being monitored. This is what they call SOSUS. It's a network of sensors at specific undersea choke points. I'll go into this and a few other things. First of all, folks, let's jump over exclusively to Epic TV. And then I also want to talk about what's happening with kind of the cutting off of energy and why that matters for Europe right now. Things are looking pretty dicey. Also, it looks like this could expand into a real war, like a large war. It is very possible right now. It is very possible right now that this could expand into a full-scale war. Now, that being said, folks, let's jump over exclusively to Epic TV. Those of you on YouTube, Rumble, again, we do a full hour-and-a-half show. We do the Q&A there. If you have questions, come join us. I'll see you there. But let me show you first. I, again, recently did a documentary, a special feature, or you could say short documentary, looking into the U.S.-Mexico border crisis. And during that trip, on both the U.S. side and the Mexico side of the border, I uncovered that the United Nations is actually facilitating it. The border crisis is not organic. The border crisis is the United Nations operation being financed by the U.S. government, which means your tax dollars paying for this. This short documentary, this special feature, shows the evidence for this. Let me show you a trailer for that now, then we'll jump over to Epic TV exclusively. What use is a wall if the migrant crisis is being facilitated by the United Nations working with NGOs?
Many of the people that can't get visas to come, start off in Mexico, they start in South America.
Is this a coordinated effort? And if so, what's the motive?
Families coming across claiming asylum because they had children, but there was the same children every week. They started testing DNA to make sure that the children were in fact children of the parents. 30% weren't.
What's really happening at the U.S.-Mexico border?
These are all human smuggling cases from the past couple of weeks.
What caused the U.S. policy shift from mass immigration? Again, folks, that's the border feature I've been working on for quite a while now. If you haven't watched it, go check it out. That's on the Crossroads channel on Epic TV. Again, it's a good while working on that one, and I think the information is pretty significant. I think that video, if seen widely enough, can change the narrative on the border crisis because it completely changes, it completely unravels a lot of the false narratives we've been told. Also, please share that video. Help us get the word out. Again, it's mostly word of mouth. This stuff gets out. So share it, folks. Tell your friends, tell your family members, send it around. I do think it's important people see that because it presents evidence I think most people are totally unaware of. That, again, completely changes the narrative on the border crisis. This is being financed by your tax dollars. You are paying for the border crisis. It's significant. All right, that said, folks, let's jump over to Epic TV exclusively. See you there. All right, folks. Thank you so much for being here again. Those of you curious, today's tea is actually a white tea. It's called white peonies. It's a very good tea. I've been on a white tea thing lately, actually. All right, that said, I want to show you now. Going back, I showed you the evidence suggesting the U.S. did it. You have physical evidence. Again, it's tangential evidence, right? So it's circumstantial evidence. I mean, if you were in a court and you were trying to create a criminal case, then what I showed you is what you call tangential evidence. It's evidence that taken by itself does not show a rocket flying and blowing